Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Monster Families. Now, as far as monster families go, the snakes are definitely a very weird conglomeration of entities. To say the least, there are many, many different types of snakes. There are fire snakes and cold snakes and well, there's salamanders too. And there are poison snakes and there's magic snakes, and it's all over the place. Depending on which snake you find, you're going to find specific bonuses for those snakes. The tomb vipers, for instance, have a chance to deal poison damage, and they fire a poison projectile. And speaking of the tomb vipers, they used to be one of the most highly damaging monsters in the entire game, and could bypass just about any player's protective effectiveness because they were dealing damage in the weirdest way possible. This was a bug that was actually fixed in Diablo 2 Resurrected, but still exists in Diablo 2 LOD if you want to go play with it. Basically, what happens is that they fire essentially what is similar to a Amazon poison javelin. However, it's not an Amazon poison javelin. And what happens is the javelin has a physical damage, which is normally only applied when it actually hits a target. However, for some reason or another, the physical damage of this magical poison javelin that used to apply on this particular character would actually apply in the poison. So instead of it doing poison damage elementally to your character, it was actually dishing out the damage of the javelin as physical damage in a poison damage way, which essentially bypassed your poison resistance entirely and instead focused on your physical damage reduction. And it did so in such a way that was absolutely insane, to the point where it would like drain the HP of your character within seconds, and there was very little that anybody could do about it. They did eventually, like I said, fix this in Diablo 2 Resurrected, so you won't find this to be the case anymore. But if you'd like to go play with the original ridiculously broken version, you can find him in Neelithak's Temple in Diablo 2 LOD. They also have several versions, like the Claw Vipers, the Pit Vipers, the Serpent Magus, which can deal poison damage, but also have the ability to fire Bone Spear, but it's not quite Bone Spear, it's just a magic projectile. And I have some of them right here for you to see. As you can see, they clearly shoot what looks like Bone Spear, but it's not Bone Spear. It's actually a monster-specific version of the ability. In fact, a lot of the monsters tend to have these like specific versions. You'll also notice that they're charging me over and over again. Now, the charge ability that the snakes have is actually quite interesting, and it is something that we should probably talk about. So, is it charge? No, not quite. It is technically sort of similar to charge, just the way that this Bone Spear that looks like Bone Spear is similar to Bone Spear. However, it does have some differences. Most notably, the main difference of this particular ability is that it has the ability to always hit. In other words, it will not miss. If you go to the original like Amazon Basin page, you'll find a entry for charge for the actual ability of the snakes in the charge page for the paladin. And it says thus, all the way down here at the bottom. It says the following monsters also use charge as an attack, although it always hits and cannot be blocked. So if you ever wondered why the Claw Vipers seem to absolutely rip you to shreds, this is kind of the reason why. Now, there are some ways around the way that charge functions, and it's kind of interesting. So first off, let's talk about the way that you can potentially prevent these monsters from absolutely clapping your booty cheeks. The first one comes down to the fact that charge doesn't work unless you are outside of melee range of the target. So it's kind of a weird one, but essentially the damage bonus and everything that charge gives you doesn't apply if the monster is within melee range. So what this means is that when you run away from the snakes, you give them the opportunity to charge you. Whereas, if you stay in melee range, you'll notice that they're no longer charging me anymore. But as soon as I go to run from them, they will begin charging me again, and they will start to do massive amounts of damage. Now, the thing about the charge is that it's kind of bugged. So you might run into versions of the snakes that don't do any damage when they charge, And you might run into versions of the snakes that do massive amounts of damage when they charge. Now, I tried to hunt down some information on this because there's not really a lot of information out there on stuff like this. And I did manage to come across a really old page on the Amazon Basin forums where somebody talks about this. And I'll save you like the nitty gritty of all the details, but basically some of the monsters have damage in their charge field and some of them don't. So there's a specific field, it's called the S1 min and max damage. And some of the monsters do not have any entries in these fields. And the list of those monsters is thus. The Claw Vipers in Act 2 and 3 do not have any damage in their charge fields, and so when you get hit by charge with the Claw Vipers in Act 2 and 3, they don't do any damage. However, the Claw Vipers in Act 5, which are the same Claw Vipers from Act 2 and 3, do have an entry in their damage field, and they do lots of damage when they hit you. The Pit Vipers in the Glacial Trail and Icy Cellar also likewise have 0 damage in their field. And the Serpent Magus in Act 5 and Worldstone Keep and in the Throne Room don't have any damage in their field either. But with the exception of these 3 monster types, in these specific areas, all the rest of the snakes do actually do damage with their charge, and they hurt a lot. These are one of the monster types that don't do any damage with their charge, and so when they charge you, you just don't really take very much damage. They still do something, but it's not as much as the other ones do. Now, these are one of the special types. These are the ones that deal the Bone Spears. There is another special type, which is located in Neelathak's Temple, and that is the one that does the poison damage. Not all of them are special. Like, they don't all have individual abilities. Some of them are just rather generic, and they don't really have much more going for them than that. They may be elementally aligned, and usually it's very obvious when they're elementally aligned to a specific element. Another interesting thing about the charge attack is that it adds elemental damage to the ability as well. So not only does it always hit, but it also has the ability to add the element of that particular monster's affinity. So, for instance, when you get charged by the Serpent Magus, they add magic damage to the effect. When you get charged by, like, for instance, the fire version, they add fire damage to the charge. When you get charged by the cold version, they add cold damage to the charge, and so forth and so on. This is kind of like a little chart that shows you sort of how the damage is added and how the damage multiplies with player count. So the Serpent Magus, which is the one that charges with the no physical damage, still does magical damage on his charge, and it gets multiplied with player count. So he does 67 to 135 magic damage when he charges you in player's 8 hell difficulty, essentially. The fire damage one also has multiplication for player count, and so forth and so on. So it depends on each individual monster type which one you're dealing with, because every single monster has a different elemental affinity, and you can kind of see those elemental affinities in the chart. So if you look at it, you can clearly see that, like, the Tomb Viper, for instance, is immune to lightning. So that means he's going to have a lightning affinity when it comes to his charge damage. The Pit Viper is immune to cold, so he's going to be a cold affinity. And the Salamander, for instance, is immune to fire, so he'll have fire damage added to his attack, and so forth and so on. The Serpent Magus is the one that has an affinity with magic, and he actually has 70% magic resistance, and he applies the magic damage to his attack, and so forth and so on. Now, most of them are either highly resistant or immune to poison as well, which is kind of interesting. This also means that they are static in their immunities. So most of the time, when you come across a monster in Diablo 2, there is a possibility for them to be immune to one element, and then they can potentially be immune to another one by getting modifiers, right? But if a monster is ever immune to 2 elements at the same time, they can never be immune to another element because it prevents them from being so. Because you can only have 2 immunities in the game unless you're one of the special monsters like the Uber monsters, which are the only real exception to that list. So when you have one of these monsters, like, for instance, if you come across a monster that is immune to, like, the Pit Viper, which is immune to cold and poison at the same time, then they can never be immune to lightning, they can never be immune to fire, they can never be immune to magic, and they can never be immune to physical. They are stuck with a cold poison immunity forever. which is actually quite unique because most monsters in the game do not come with 2 immunities static, and they also generally tend to have that one immunity and then another one that varies depending on what modifiers they end up with. Well, not these guys. A lot of these are actually immune by default to 2 resistances immediately, which means they can never be immune to anything else, which is kind of funny. You don't really see this very often. There's a couple, like a handful of monsters that do this, but these are some of them. So as you go forward and you look at these, it's really obvious though. Like when you see one like the Salamander is very obviously immune to fire. He's usually red. He has the fire immunity thing on his name. He's immune to fire in Nightmare difficulty too, and it's very obvious. The cold res one is definitely a blue type snake and is very obviously immune to cold, and he's actually unbreakably immune to cold too. I don't believe you could break him even with low resistance and conviction. You would have to have a Sunder to break him because 145% is just enough to completely cancel out both conviction and lower res. So if you had like a monster who was 145 and you had maximum conviction, that would be negative 30, and you had maximum lower res, which I believe is 15, he would still be 100%, which means he would still be cold immune. So some of these monsters like this that have extremely high cold resistances or resistances in general can be unbreakably immune to the point where no matter how much conviction and lower res you have, they just will never break. So you need a Sunder to break that particular monster, otherwise you won't be able to kill him with cold damage. Their HP seems to be relatively low. So looking at their hit points, like they have very bad hit points. To put it in perspective, if we look at like the Act 1 monster, like the Fallen has between 1,116 and 3,273 at their best. The Snake is barely clearing 3,273, which is the highest value that the Fallen has, and slightly doubles that at 6,800. If it was closer to 10k, it would be a middling, but it's definitely on the lower end because there are definitely monsters in the game that have like 20,000 HP or higher. So most of these snakes are definitely on the low end of HP pools, which means that in general, like you shouldn't have too much trouble killing them as long as you're not trying to kill them with the thing that they're immune to. So, if you're fighting the fire one, then use something else besides fire. If you're fighting the lightning one, use something else besides lightning, and so forth and so on. They do have relatively high physical resistance at 40%, which is close to the average at 50%. But for some reason, the guest monsters, which are in Act 5, have really low physical resistance, except for this one for some reason that has 70. So the ones in Act 5 tend to be more weak to physical damage, whereas the ones in Act 2 through 3 have higher physical resistance. They also have higher block chance, too, 24, 22. Whereas the ones in Act 5 have 20% block chance. Let's take a look at the poison one real quick, because this is the one that I was telling you about that actually used to kill people on a regular basis. So this is the one that will shoot these like poison javelins at you, and the poison javelins essentially dish out, or used to dish out, physical damage instead of poison damage. Or I think it was actually poison damage along with the physical damage. So you actually got both at the same time, which was even worse. And these used to actually kill tons of characters. I'm pretty sure they were the bane of hardcore. The bugged effect on them was actually so bad that I remember taking a 95% resistant character down here with like 95% poison res, 95%, basically all resistances. I had 50% physical damage reduction, MDR, PDR, the works. I basically had everything that I could potentially get to try and keep him alive. And I deliberately stood in the poison to see how long I could survive the poison effect. And it killed me in, I think it was like 2 seconds. Just instantly dead. I was like, oh, okay. So tankiest character that I've ever created just almost instantly dies to these poison-like javelins. Now, of course, these guys have all the regular tricks, too, so not only do they have the poison, which does massive amounts of damage, they also have the charge, and they get the regular attacks as well. In general, with these guys, it's just better to either be in melee range with them or to not be near them at all. because if you are outside of melee range and they charge you, there's a very good chance they might murder you. If you're in melee range, you can prevent them from charging you, which is probably the easiest way to avoid death. And I think that pretty much covers the snakes. There's just so much variation in the snake family that it's very difficult to really understand what's going on. But just as a fun little anecdote here, let's look at some of the damage modifiers. So, incidentally, the base physical damage and magic damage, fire or poison damage, are applied by all their missiles. A critical hit from a claw viper in the frozen river would apply up to 570 to 760 physical damage and 270 magic damage in a full game, or up to 1,030 total damage. Those that spawn in Crystalline Passage, which is where I suspect you actually were, as level 82 area, not level 83. And so basically, like, one snake can hit you for nearly 1,000 damage. And if you run into a pack of these guys, which is actually much more likely, and they all charge you at the same time, you can very easily get wiped off the face of the planet by the charges. It's very difficult to deal with these guys because you have to get within melee range to stop them from charging. But at the same time, getting within melee range can be extremely deadly. Very, very deadly. But once you are in melee range and you stop them from charging, they become weak as little baby kittens, and they just don't really do very much damage anymore. But especially when you have a large pack of them, like 6 or 7 of them in a row, good luck trying to get within melee range. He also goes on to talk about one of the most evil monsters in the game, which is apparently a Berserker Unholy Corpse, which is a different monster that also has charge. And the combination of the Berserker effect with the charge effect gives him a maximum damage output of 1,972 with a crit, which could potentially wipe the floor with the majority of the characters in the game. And God forbid you had Amp on you, because you'd be closer to 4K on that particular charge. The charging snakes are definitely nasty. I have died to them many times on teleporting sorceresses, and it was nearly instantaneous. If you accidentally teleport too close to a pack of snakes and they all instantaneously charge you, they will all guaranteed hit, and they will absolutely annihilate you from the face of the planet. So do be aware that when you're teleporting through places that have claw vipers in them, that you're very likely going to die if you're not careful. Better be teleport very fast. Anything else that I missed on these guys? I don't think so. I think for the most part with these guys, they tend to be very straightforward. Apparently there's a fire projectile version. The Salamanders apparently launch a fire projectile, which I was unaware of. So the poison ones launch a poison projectile. The magic ones launch a magic projectile. And apparently the Salamanders, which are the fire versions, apparently have a fire projectile that they launch. I don't think I've ever seen the fire projectile before, or maybe I just never really paid attention to it. It's rather interesting. Definitely a complicated monster, and definitely one that I've died to on many occasions. I still remember very, very not nicely. I remember I was going through on my Cold Sorceress, and I was teleporting through Claw Viper Temple because, as you know, most of the monsters in Claw Viper Temple are immune to cold. And I managed to get all the way to the the dais where the Viper amulet is. I teleported onto the thing, and sure enough, Fangskin had spawned on top of the thing. Immediately, as soon as I teleported where the amulet was, all of them charged me instantaneously, and I was instantaneously dead. I still remember that very fondly from my sorceress. It's just one of those crazy things about the sorceress that she kind of gets hard checked if she's a cold sorceress in Claw Viper Temple. And not only that, but it is extremely difficult to teleport through Claw Viper Temple, especially if your boy Fangskin spawns on top of the pedestal, in which case sometimes you have no choice but to reload and hope he's not on the pedestal the next time you teleport through. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals joining me. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button if you are enjoying the content. And as always, keep watching.